Can you, to kick us off, please tell me about the types of art projects that you were involved in the 1980s and 90s?
The work that I was involved in the 1980s and 90s came from a feminist framework, and so a lot of it was anti the patriarchy run by men who were oppressing us. And so it was a time when women weren't allowed to play guitars or electric guitars, and so a whole lot of women got together and created bands, and so there were a whole lot of lesbian bands that were around, and one of them was Nice Girls Don't Spit, this band.
Yeah, I see your shirt.
Country and Western band, and we used to eat fire and crack whips. And
that was your band?
That was my band, yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Awesome.
And I was the lead singer in it with a woman named Billy Clark. And then the other thing that I did is I set up the Women's Circus, which still runs in Footscray now. And so my practice has been bands, the Women's Circus, and then I did a one-woman show called Car Maintenance, Explosives and Love. And that was a show about a lesbian, working class lesbian in a relationship with a middle class lesbian, and it was also about S&M and about differences in class, and it ended up in a domestic violence situation between two lesbians.
Yeah, and I'm interested to know, because we were talking before about how, well, LGBTIQ domestic violence is like a real touch point issue at the moment. Like, if you reignited that one woman show, I reckon it would have absolute relevance still. Like, how overt were those issues at the time? Were you like groundbreaking, bringing that to a Fringe festival?
Yeah, I think that at that time the community was still very vulnerable. Lesbians didn't feel like they were in a position of being recognised by the wider community. So some people would say talking about domestic violence is undermining an already fragile community. And then other people would say that we're interested in lesbian issues, but we're not interested in class.
Gotcha.
That was mostly the middle class women.
Yes.
It wasn't an issue.
So that's what these days we would call intersectionality, like the intersections between oppressed identities and where they meet. And there's so much attention on that in the queer community now. But we were saying before that the language around this stuff has changed a lot since the 80s and 90s.
Absolutely. I think there's the same issues like domestic violence and class and people being unrecognised or feeling unwelcome in the community, or some people have got more power, but the language of how you talk about it is quite different.
Can you talk about how it's changed?
I think that the language has just changed to, I suppose I should talk about my experience. So my experience is being a lesbian, growing up in a family. And how I knew I was a lesbian is I was reading the TV Week magazine, and there I turned over the page with Susie Quattro in a leather bikini, and I was 12, and I just had this really strange feeling about Susie Quattro.
Leather bikini, you had no hope.
And I remember being at Southland Shopping Centre on the 3rd floor with my sister, turning to her and going, I think I'm a lesbo.
When you were 12?
Yeah, and my sister went, yeah.
She already knew.
Yeah. So that was all right. So there was that sort of feeling. And then being a lesbian and coming into Melbourne, I would just go to all the lesbian, we had bars and discos and different places, just go there and be with the lesbians. So this is in the early 80s. And we wouldn't link with gay men because we were doing our own thing. And also, generalisations here, gay men had professional jobs, they had more money, and some of them were lawyers or, things like that.
Still true. And
we were like the poor girls. But then AIDS came along, and I just saw these two groups come together. When gay men were becoming sick with AIDS, I saw a whole lot of lesbians going to houses, cooking meals, washing sheets, supporting people in grief, which these two very different cultures, then that's when I saw these two groups come together and start to create a community which has become more complex and in some ways more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, my idea of like our community's history is exactly that. That's when it started to, like, the lines started to get crossed, or the barriers started to get crossed.